Picture this. It's exactly 2 in the morning, just a few short days after your 45th birthday. The house is completely dead silent around you. Everyone else is fast asleep, wrapped up in their own dreams, completely unaware of the quiet panic currently happening at the kitchen table. The only light in the room is the harsh, bright glow of your smartphone screen. It casts a pale blue shadow across your tired face. You wipe your eyes, hoping the screen will look different when you open them, but nothing really changes. You're staring blankly at your banking app. Specifically, your eyes are locked onto a high-yield savings account. This isn't just any account. This is the account you've bled for over a solid decade to build, the one that was supposed to be your ultimate safety net against the chaotic world outside. For 10 long years, you did everything perfectly right. Every single time you got paid, you scraped a little bit off the top and pushed it straight into this account. You skipped the spontaneous weekend trips. You kept driving that older car, long after the warranty expired. You watched that balance slowly tick upward, month after grinding month. Honestly, it's a decent number sitting there on the screen. It's a number that, if you had seen it back in your 20s, would have made you feel like you had finally made it. It's the exact kind of balance that was supposed to represent total security, peace of mind, and a long, deep breath of relief. But sitting here right now, in the pitch black of the kitchen, your chest just feels incredibly tight. The air in the room feels remarkably heavy, because right next to your glowing phone, sitting on the cold wood of the table, is a terrifying stack of modern reality. At the top of that stack is a glossy brochure for the university your oldest kid is dreaming about attending. You look at the estimated annual tuition, printed neatly on the back page, and it honestly looks more like a starter home mortgage than a simple school bill. Right beneath that brochure is a crisp, formal letter from your health insurance provider. They're politely informing you about the new, painfully high deductible for your family plan starting next year. It's just another massive financial hurdle that appeared completely out of nowhere to block your path. And then your mind drifts to a much simpler, more frequent everyday nightmare. You remember your last trip to the local grocery store. You remember standing at the checkout line, staring at a cart filled with nothing but basic, boring essentials, and feeling your stomach physically drop when the cashier announced the final total. You pull your focus back down to the banking app resting in the palm of your hand. You look closely at the interest payout for the past month. It's sitting right there at the top of the transaction list, a tiny, almost insulting little deposit that feels like a bad joke compared to the rising costs surrounding you. Suddenly, a deeply terrifying realization washes over you, freezing you completely in your chair. Despite being the absolute perfect saver, despite playing by all the old school rules your parents hammered into your head from childhood, you're actually losing the game. Your hard-earned money is practically suffocating inside that digital vault. The secure financial safety net you spent your entire adult life carefully weaving together is unraveling much faster than you can patch it. You're 45. Time is suddenly accelerating, and you finally see the brutal truth. The simple act of saving money isn't keeping you safe anymore. It's quietly destroying your entire future. If that terrifying realization sounds completely familiar, you're not alone. In fact, that exact midnight panic attack is a silent epidemic among hardworking people in their 40s. It happens in quiet kitchens and dark bedrooms all over the world. You wake up, you do the math, and you realize the safety net is full of giant holes. It is incredibly exhausting to realize you played the game exactly as you were instructed, only to find out the rules were rigged from the start. From the time you were a child, society drilled a very specific financial script into your brain. Put your pennies in the piggy bank. Save for a rainy day. A penny saved is a penny earned. We were taught that saving cash was the ultimate, undisputed path to financial security. And to be fair, when you were in your 20s, that advice actually made a little bit of sense. Back then, saving was just about building a small buffer between you and a flat tire, or maybe scraping together enough for a security deposit on a better apartment. You just needed to survive the month without going totally broke. But right around age 45, the entire financial landscape undergoes a massive, invisible shift. The math fundamentally changes, but nobody taps you on the shoulder to warn you. What was once a smart strategy for a young adult suddenly becomes a dangerous, suffocating trap for someone in middle age. At this stage of life, you aren't just trying to outrun a flat tire anymore. You are trying to outrun the massive, structural costs of a mature adult life. You are staring down the barrel of college tuitions, aging parents who need help, rising healthcare costs, and the looming shadow of your own retirement. The trap is entirely psychological. You hold on to all that cash in a savings account because it feels incredibly safe. You can log in whenever you want. You can see the exact numbers sitting right there on the screen. It creates a comforting illusion of complete control in a world that feels increasingly chaotic. But you need to acknowledge just how exhausting it is to maintain that illusion. It takes a massive toll on your spirit to constantly tell yourself no over and over again. You spend years delaying your own gratification, skipping the vacations, and buying the cheaper brands, all because you think you're buying long-term security. Every time you make a sacrifice, you expect the reward of lasting peace of mind. Instead, you just feel a growing, nagging anxiety that you are simply treading water in a rapidly rising river. You are paddling as hard as you can, but the shoreline of true financial freedom keeps getting further and further away. This is the hidden reality of the problem. The old advice of simply hoarding cash in a bank account doesn't work when time is no longer on your side. In your 20s, you had decades to let small amounts of interest slowly accumulate. At 45, you simply don't have the luxury of slow-motion wealth building. The bank isn't holding your money in a protective vault, keeping it warm and safe for your future. They are actually relying on your fear of the unknown to keep your money cheap and accessible to them. The safety blanket of a massive savings account is actually a slow-moving financial hazard that practically guarantees you will run out of time before you secure your freedom. To understand exactly why this is happening to you, we need to strip away all the emotion for a minute and look straight at the cold, hard data. Because that sinking feeling you get when you look at your account balance is not just in your head. You are not going crazy. And you are certainly not bad at managing money. What you are experiencing is a mathematical reality, and we can prove it by looking at the numbers hiding right in plain sight. Let us start by looking at inflation, which is the silent, invisible thief sneaking into your bank account every single night. If you look at the historical data from the Federal Reserve over the last century, average inflation hovers right around 3%. But anyone who has bought a carton of eggs, paid a utility bill, or filled up a gas tank recently knows that the real-world inflation we feel in our daily lives often runs much hotter than the official average. But even if we stick to that conservative 3% number, you have to understand what it actually means for your life. Inflation does not physically reach into your account and subtract dollars. If you put $50,000 in the bank, it will still say $50,000 next year. The damage is completely invisible. It simply means that the cost of existing in the world goes up, making your pile of cash fundamentally weaker with every passing day. Now, compare that invisible loss to what your bank is actually paying you. Let us pretend you found an incredibly generous high-yield savings account that pays you 4% a year. On paper, you might think you are beating inflation by 1%, but you have to remember that the government requires you to pay ordinary income tax on that interest. By the time you pay your taxes, that 4% drops significantly, meaning you are actually losing purchasing power every single year. This is the deeply flawed, systemic reality of the modern economy. The entire financial system is purposefully engineered to quietly punish people who just sit on piles of cash. The rules of the game are set up to heavily reward people who own assets and borrow money, while silently levying a massive hidden tax on the diligent, everyday people trying to save their way to a better life. Think about how a traditional bank actually operates behind closed doors. When you deposit your hard-earned paycheck, they do not carefully lock it away in a secure vault with your name on it. They immediately turn around and lend your money to someone else. They lend it to someone buying a house, someone starting a new business, or a massive corporation expanding their operations. And the bank charges those borrowers a substantially higher interest rate than the tiny fraction of a percent they pass back to you. The bank makes billions of dollars in pure profit on the spread between what they pay you and what they charge everyone else. They are essentially using your fear of taking risks to generate massive, risk-free returns for their own shareholders. You are literally funding the exact same system that is keeping you financially stuck. You take on 100% of the invisible inflation risk, constantly losing your purchasing power, while the banking institutions reap all the massive financial rewards. It is a completely rigged game, and a simple savings account is the absolute worst piece on the board. This is exactly why you feel so utterly exhausted and defeated sitting at your kitchen table at 45 years old. You are fighting against a massive, undeniable macroeconomic headwind. You are trying to build long-term generational wealth using the absolute weakest financial weapon available to you. You essentially brought a plastic butter knife to a modern structural financial war. Understanding this data entirely removes the personal shame from your situation. You are not falling behind because you lack personal discipline. You are not failing because you buy too much coffee or do not have enough willpower to stick to a tight budget. You are simply struggling because you are playing by a set of rules that were quietly rewritten decades ago without anyone telling you. Once you truly internalize this invisible dynamic, the midnight panic you felt staring at your phone starts to make perfect, logical sense. Your subconscious brain inherently knew that something was deeply wrong with your financial trajectory, even if you could not put the exact economic formulas to it. You realize that your cash is just a melting ice cube, and you have to find a way to get it into the freezer. Here's what most people don't realize about the psychology of keeping all your money in a traditional savings account. We like to tell ourselves that we are making a highly rational, calculated decision to protect our family. We look at the volatile stock market, we look at the chaotic headlines on the news, and we decide that playing it safe is the only logical move. But the truth is, your decision to hoard cash has absolutely nothing to do with logic. You are actually being completely controlled by a deep biological glitch in your human brain. Behavioral psychologists call this specific glitch loss aversion. It is a fundamental cognitive bias hardwired into our DNA from the days when we were just trying to survive in the wilderness. The concept is incredibly simple, but violently powerful. The psychological pain you feel when you lose $50 is essentially twice as intense as the joy you feel when you find $50. Our brains are biologically wired to avoid taking a loss at almost any cost, because thousands of years ago, a loss meant you didn't survive the winter. When you reach your mid-40s, this primitive survival mechanism kicks into absolute overdrive. You realize that you have fewer working years ahead of you than you have behind you. That savings account balance represents thousands of hours of your life energy that you can never get back. To your primitive brain, the stock market looks like a dark, dangerous forest full of unpredictable predators, while your basic savings account feels like a warm, perfectly secure cave. Your brain is literally screaming at you to stay inside the cave. This leads to a massive cognitive distortion where we completely confuse volatility with actual, permanent danger. When you invest money in assets, the prices will naturally go up and down from month to month. Your brain sees a temporary dip in an index fund and completely panics, interpreting it as a fatal attack. But because inflation is slow and invisible, your brain doesn't trigger the same alarm bells. You are essentially choosing the quiet, guaranteed death of boiling slowly in a pot of water just to avoid the sudden, scary splash of jumping into a moving river. We compound this error through another psychological trap called mental accounting. You probably do this without even realizing it. You mentally divide your money into separate, emotional buckets. You have your emergency fund, your kids' college fund, and your dream vacation fund. By keeping all these buckets strictly in cash, you create a beautiful, organized illusion of control. But this mental accounting completely blinds you to the fact that the entire collective pile is rotting away from the inside out. Then there's the powerful trap of the inaction bias. Human beings are deeply terrified of making an active choice that leads to a negative outcome. If you pull your money out of savings, buy an investment, and it temporarily goes down, you feel a crushing sense of personal guilt. You blame yourself for taking an action that hurt your family. But if you just leave the money sitting in the bank, and it slowly loses half its value over a decade, you don't feel the same guilt. you can just blame the economy, the government, or bad luck. This is the ultimate lie we tell ourselves. We think that leaving our money in cash is a neutral, safe position. We think we are simply sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the perfect time to make a move. But in the modern financial system, there are absolutely no sidelines. Choosing to do nothing with your money is actually one of the most aggressive, risky financial actions you can possibly take. You are actively betting that the cost of living will suddenly stop rising, which is a bet you are mathematically guaranteed to lose. On top of all this biological programming, you have to factor in pure, unadulterated decision fatigue. By the time you reach 45, you are managing a staggering amount of daily cognitive load. You are making hundreds of high-stakes decisions every week at your job. You are managing the complex emotional needs of your growing children, and you are likely starting to navigate the healthcare needs of your aging parents. Your brain is completely fried by 8 in the evening. When you are that mentally exhausted, the sheer thought of researching investment accounts, understanding tax strategies, and rebalancing portfolios feels like climbing a mountain with a refrigerator strapped to your back. So your brain takes the absolute path of least resistance. It chooses the familiar, dull pain of slowly falling behind, over the sharp, overwhelming effort required to learn a new financial language. The savings account isn't just a financial tool, it is a psychological crutch for an exhausted adult. This is exactly why reading another personal finance book or trying to muster up more willpower will never solve your problem. You cannot outsmart millions of years of human evolution just by trying really hard to be brave. Your emotional brain will always win in a fair fight. If you want to actually break out of this trap and save your future, you have to stop fighting your psychology and start bypassing it entirely. You need a cold, emotionless system that physically removes the money from your control before your primitive brain can even react. To completely fix this massive problem, you have to entirely stop relying on your own willpower and instead build a mechanical structure that does the heavy lifting for you. We call this structural change, the velocity pivot system. It is not a new budgeting app, and it is certainly not a spreadsheet where you track every single cup of coffee you buy. It is a permanent, physical barrier that you place directly between your primitive, fearful brain and your actual financial future. The core philosophy of the velocity pivot is accepting that your mind will always choose the path of least resistance when you are tired. Therefore, we have to make the act of hoarding cash incredibly difficult, and the act of building real wealth completely effortless. The very first piece of architecture you have to construct in this new system is what we call the cash ceiling. Right now, your bank accounts operate without any upper limits. You just keep pouring water into the bucket, hoping that eventually the bucket will feel heavy enough to make you feel safe. But as we already established, that bucket has a massive hole at the bottom called inflation. The cash ceiling completely fundamentally changes how you treat that bucket. It is a hard, strict, and mathematically calculated limit on the exact amount of lazy money you are legally allowed to hold. To build your cash ceiling, you need to calculate exactly how much money it takes to run your household for 6 to 8 months if every single source of income suddenly vanished tomorrow. Do not inflate this number with luxury items or imaginary, worst-case, apocalyptic scenarios. Just calculate the raw, baseline cost of keeping the lights on, keeping the mortgage paid, and keeping food on the kitchen table. Once you establish that specific number, let us say it is roughly $30,000, that becomes your absolute ceiling. That is the maximum size of your financial ice cooler. You keep that specific amount in a high-yield savings account where it is perfectly safe, totally liquid, and ready to deploy if the roof caves in or you lose your job. Now, here is where your internal psychology is going to violently fight back against you. Your loss aversion brain is going to scream that 6 months is simply not enough. Your anxiety will start whispering in your ear, asking, what if it takes a year to find a new job? Or what if the economy totally collapses? Your brain will aggressively try to negotiate the ceiling higher and higher until you are right, back to hoarding all your cash. You have to firmly ignore that voice. You must recognize that any dollar you hold beyond that strict 6-month ceiling is no longer an emergency fund. It has officially mutated into a fear fund. And as you now know, a fear fund is the most expensive, destructive financial asset you can possibly own at age 45. Once you lock in the exact dollar amount of your cash ceiling, you have to build the mechanism that actually enforces it. You cannot trust yourself to manually move the money. If you wait until the end of the month to look at your balance and decide how much extra you can invest, you will find an excuse to keep it. You will suddenly remember a vague home repair project you might want to do next spring, and the money will stay exactly where it is. Instead, you log into your banking portal and you set up a forced automated sweep. You pick a specific day of the month, usually a few days after your primary paycheck clears, and you instruct the bank's computer system to evaluate your checking account balance. You tell the system that any single dollar sitting above your monthly baseline operating expenses must be violently swept out of the account. You remove your exhausted, emotional brain completely out of the equation. On the 28th of every single month, whether you are having a great week or a terrible week, whether the news is positive or negative, the sweep happens. The machine wakes up, looks at your cash, takes the excess, and forces it out the door. The psychological relief you will feel after the second or third month of this is absolutely staggering. You no longer have to carry the mental burden of deciding what to do with your leftover cash. When you log into your bank app late at night, you just see your perfectly stable baseline. You stop agonizing over whether you are investing enough, because the system is doing it for you in the background. But forcing the lazy money out of your checking account is only the first half of the equation. Pushing the cash out the door does not help if it just piles up on the front porch. That freshly swept money needs a specific, productive destination where it can actually begin to work for you. Once that excess cash is aggressively swept out of your daily checking account, it desperately needs a permanent, productive home. If you just sweep it into another basic savings account at a different bank, you have not actually solved the core problem. You have simply moved the melting ice cube from the kitchen counter to the living room table. To actually stop the bleeding and start building real momentum, you must build the second piece of the velocity pivot, which is a mechanism we call the index escalator. The index escalator is a completely mechanical, emotionless pipeline that takes your money directly from the sweeping phase and converts it into actual ownership of the global economy. Most 45-year-olds are completely terrified of the word investing because society has totally misrepresented what it actually means. We have been brainwashed by movies and financial news networks to believe that investing requires staring at 6 computer monitors, analyzing complex charts, and aggressively day trading stocks while shouting on a telephone. Because of this toxic stereotype, you probably think you need to become a Wall Street expert to grow your wealth. You open a brokerage account, you look at all the flashing red and green numbers, and you immediately feel a wave of intense paralysis. You read a scary headline about a looming recession, so you decide to wait a few weeks. Then the market goes up, and you feel like you missed the boat, so you wait for it to drop again. You spend years trapped in this exhausting cycle of trying to perfectly time your entry. Here is the undeniable truth about timing the market. It is a massive, unwinnable psychological trap that will absolutely destroy your returns. Your primitive brain will always find a highly logical sounding reason why today is a terrible day to invest your money. If the market is hitting all-time highs, your brain screams that a crash is imminent. If the market is actively crashing, your brain screams that it is going to zero. If you rely on your own daily willpower to click the buy button, you will systematically talk yourself out of building wealth every single time. This is exactly why you must build the index escalator, to completely bypass your own paralyzing thoughts. The mechanics are beautifully simple. You open a standard brokerage account and you instruct the system to automatically purchase a broad market index fund every single week, ideally syncing the exact dates with your automated cash sweep. You are setting up a permanent, repeating rule that executes blindly, completely ignoring how you feel or what the news cycle is screaming about that day. You do not need to understand complex financial jargon to understand what an index fund actually does. Think of it like this. Instead of going to the racetrack and stressing yourself out trying to pick the one winning horse, An index fund simply allows you to buy the entire racetrack. You are taking your swept cash and buying a tiny, fractional slice of the 500 largest, most profitable, and most powerful companies on the face of the earth, all in one single, frictionless transaction. When you buy the entire market mechanically, you completely detach your volatile emotions from the unpredictable outcome of any single company. You no longer have to care if a specific bank fails, or if a specific tech CEO makes a terrible decision, or if a retail chain goes totally bankrupt. You are insulated from individual failure because you own a piece of everything else that is thriving and growing to take its place. The invisible automation is the true secret weapon of this entire structure. You link the automated sweep we built in the cause last step directly to this escalator. The excess money leaves your checking account on a Tuesday, it hits the brokerage account on a Wednesday, and it automatically buys the index fund on a Thursday without you ever having to open the app, look at a chart, or make a single conscious decision. You have literally automated the habit of becoming an owner. Imagine the profound psychological shift of how this actually feels in your daily life. You could be sleeping deeply in your bed, or driving your kids to a chaotic weekend soccer practice, or sitting in a boring meeting at work. And entirely in the background, a silent, unblinking machine is actively converting your depreciating cash into hard, appreciating assets. You stop being a passive victim of the economy, and you quietly transform into an active participant in human progress. This is exactly how you transition from being a tragic target of inflation to a direct beneficiary of it. Those exact same massive corporations that are raising the prices of your groceries, your gas, and your insurance are the very companies sitting inside your index fund. When you become a mechanical owner of those companies, inflation fundamentally stops being your mortal enemy and slowly starts becoming the powerful wind at your back, pushing your net worth higher. Now, you will eventually face a moment where the market inevitably drops, because that is simply how markets naturally breathe. But because your escalator is completely automated and buying every single week, you do not panic and sell. You actually end up buying more shares automatically because they are essentially on sale. You have taken the very thing that used to cause you absolute financial terror, market volatility, and turned it into a cold, calculated mechanical advantage. The first two parts of the system are designed to handle the money that is already sitting in front of you. But there is a third and completely impenetrable layer you must build to lock this entire machine together. We call this final structural component the invisible shield. The core concept behind the invisible shield is brilliantly simple, but wildly effective. The absolute best way to stop yourself from accidentally sabotaging your own financial future is to make sure you never actually see the money in the first place. You cannot spend what you cannot see, and you cannot be tempted by dollars that never arrive in your hands. Building this shield is critically important right now, because your mid-40s usually represent your absolute peak earning years. If you look at your trajectory, you are probably making significantly more money right now than you ever did in your 20s or 30s. But despite that higher salary, it somehow still feels like you are just barely scraping by every single month. That exhausting feeling is caused by a silent, invisible wealth killer called lifestyle creep. It happens so slowly and organically that you never even realize it is taking over your life. You get a nice promotion at work, and suddenly you justify leasing a slightly nicer car, buying slightly better wine at the grocery store, or upgrading your summer vacation just a tiny bit. Your primitive, loss-aversion brain immediately and instinctively expands your daily lifestyle to consume every single dollar available in your checking account. It is a fundamental law of human nature. If the cash is sitting right there, visible and easily accessible on your phone screen, your brain will absolutely find a highly logical, completely justifiable reason to spend it today rather than save it for a distant tomorrow. You simply cannot fight this invisible creep with a rigid spreadsheet or sheer personal willpower. By the time Friday night rolls around after a brutal week at the office, you are far too exhausted to deny yourself a small, well-deserved reward. Your willpower battery is completely dead. This is exactly where the invisible shield steps in to permanently save you from yourself. You construct this shield by going directly to the source of your income, completely bypassing your local bank account entirely. You log into your employer payroll portal, and you dramatically crank up your automated contributions to your workplace retirement accounts, like a standard 401k or a 403b. You do this aggressively, pushing the dial as high as you can possibly tolerate. You are actively intercepting the money before it ever has a chance to cross the threshold into your checking account. You are legally instructing the payroll system to slice off a massive percentage of your gross paycheck and route it straight into the financial markets. When you look at your banking app on payday, the deposit number is artificially much lower than it used to be. The psychological trick happening behind the scenes here is absolutely profound. Human beings are incredibly adaptable creatures. Your brain will adapt to that new, lower payday number almost instantly. You will naturally and effortlessly adjust your daily spending downward without feeling painfully deprived, simply because the extra money isn't sitting there begging you to spend it. Furthermore, by building this automated routing system at age 45, you are perfectly setting the stage for one of the greatest legal cheat codes in the entire financial system. In just 5 short years, when you hit age 50, the government officially unlocks special catch-up contributions. This allows you to legally shove thousands of additional dollars into these tax-sheltered accounts every year. By forcing yourself to live on an artificially reduced paycheck right now, you are building the exact financial muscle you need to maximize those catch-up contributions the second you turn 50. Plus, when you use these traditional pre-tax retirement accounts, you get an immediate break on your taxes. You are effectively forcing the government to subsidize your own wealth creation. When you have the cash ceiling, the index escalator, and the invisible shield all running simultaneously, your entire financial reality completely transforms. You are no longer relying on hope, luck, or exhausting daily discipline. You have built a cold, surgical, unblinking machine that silently converts your daily labor into permanent freedom, allowing you to finally take a deep breath and relax. To truly understand the incredible power of what you have just built, we need to look at the undeniable, brutal math of compounding. We need to completely remove the emotion from the equation and look at 2 parallel versions of your reality over the next 20 years. Let us start exactly where you are today, at age 45, and fast forward directly to age 65, which is when society expects you to smoothly transition into retirement. In version 1, which is the path you are on, before tonight, you keep doing exactly what you have always done. Let us assume you have exactly $50,000 sitting in that traditional high-yield savings account we talked about earlier. You leave it sitting right there in the dark, feeling incredibly safe, totally secure, and completely in control of your financial destiny. Let us be wildly optimistic and assume your bank continues to pay you an average of 3% interest after you pay your annual taxes on it. For the next 2 straight decades, you never touch the money. You just watch the tiny little monthly interest payments trickle into the account while you slowly approach your 65th birthday. By the time you reach age 65 and finally decide to retire, that $50,000 will have slowly grown to just over $90,000. When you log into the banking app on your last day of work, you might actually feel a brief sense of accomplishment. On paper, it genuinely looks like a massive win. You essentially made $40,000 in pure, unadulterated profit, without doing a single ounce of heavy lifting. But you have to remember the silent, invisible thief we discussed earlier. Inflation has been quietly living inside your bank account that entire time, slowly eating away at the actual purchasing power of every single dollar. If the baseline cost of living simply doubles over those same 20 years, which historically is exactly what happens, your $90,000 will actually buy significantly less in the real world than your original 50 grand could buy today. You took absolutely zero risks. You followed all the traditional rules, but you still ended up going backward. Now, let us look at version 2 of your life, where you finally decide to activate the entire velocity pivot system. You establish your strict 6-month cash ceiling to protect your family, but you take that exact same $50,000 of excess lazy money and you firmly place it onto the index escalator. You invest that entire pile directly into a broad market index fund, buying a tiny slice of the biggest companies on the planet. Historically, over almost any 20-year period, the stock market has returned an average of roughly 10% per year. But just to be incredibly safe and conservative, Let us pretend it only returns 8% annually for the rest of your career. For the next 20 years, you simply ignore the noise. You never panic when a scary headline flashes on the evening news. You never try to time the market by pulling your money out before a dip. You just let the silent, unblinking machine run completely uninterrupted in the background while you focus on living your actual life. By the time you reach age 65, in this version of reality, the exact same $50,000 has aggressively compounded and exploded into over 200 plans and $33,000. It has grown into a massive financial shield that completely dramatically outpaces inflation and actually increases your true purchasing power in the real world. And here is the most important part of this entire ruddy mathematical equation. That staggering number assumes you never added another single dime to the original pile. If your invisible shield is actively routing a healthy percentage of every future paycheck into the exact same market over those next 20 years, the math gets absolutely astronomical. You aren't just looking at $200,000 anymore. You are looking at well over $1 million in hard, appreciating assets. That is the ultimate, undeniable difference between saving and owning. The saver is mathematically guaranteed to slowly bleed out over time, while the owner forces the entire global economy to work tirelessly to guarantee their freedom. Now, you might be thinking that all of this sounds great in theory, but you are absolutely terrified that the stock market will completely crash the exact day after you set up this system. You picture yourself finally moving your money out of that safe, comfortable bank account, only to watch a global recession instantly wipe out half of your hard-earned wealth. That is an incredibly valid fear, and it is exactly what your primitive loss aversion brain is designed to scream at you right now. But you have to remember that the money you are moving onto the index escalator is not money you need to survive tomorrow. You already built your strict 6-month cash ceiling to perfectly insulate you from a sudden job loss or a massive medical emergency. The money you are investing is purely dedicated to your life 10 or 20 years down the road. If the market crashes tomorrow, it simply means your automated system is buying shares of the global economy on massive discount next week. Look, here is the truth. You can sit at your kitchen table at 2 in the morning reading about financial theories for the rest of your life, but absolutely nothing changes until you build the physical architecture. You do not need more willpower, and you definitely do not need another budgeting spreadsheet. You just need to take one specific, deeply uncomfortable micro-action in the next 24 hours to finally break the cycle of financial paralysis. Tomorrow morning, I want you to grab a pen and a piece of paper. I want you to log into your banking app and calculate your exact, bare-bones monthly survival number. Do not overcomplicate it. Just figure out exactly what it costs to keep the lights on, the mortgage paid, and food in the fridge for 30 days. Then, multiply that exact number by 6. Take that final number, write it down in massive letters on a sticky note, and slap it directly on your bathroom mirror. That number is your official cash ceiling. Stare at it every single morning when you brush your teeth. Tell yourself that every single dollar you hold above that specific number is lazy, depreciating money that is actively robbing you of your future freedom. Once you have that number cemented in your brain, I want you to log back into your bank and set up your very first automated sweep. Even if you just set it up to sweep $50 out of your checking account on the 1st of next month, just do it. You need to physically prove to your brain that the automation works, that the world does not end, and that you can survive perfectly fine without seeing that extra cash sitting in your primary account. This entire journey is not really about getting rich, so you can buy a nicer car or a bigger house. When you hit your mid-40s, the fundamental purpose of money completely shifts. It is no longer about acquiring physical status symbols to impress your neighbors. It is entirely about buying back your own precious time and securing the ultimate luxury of having options. True wealth is the quiet, profound freedom to say no to a terrible boss. It is the ability to open a medical bill or a college tuition notice without feeling a cold sweat instantly drip down your spine. It is the deep, structural peace of mind, knowing that you do not have to work until the day you die just to keep a roof over your head. For the last 10 years, you thought hoarding cash in a simple bank account was the best way to protect your family. It felt like you were saving your life, but in reality, you were just hitting the pause button while the rest of the world aggressively marched forward. You played exactly by the rules. You were taught, but the rules changed, and now it is time for you to change your entire strategy. Your 65-year-old self is entirely depending on the specific choices your 45-year-old self makes right now, tonight, in the dark. You can either close your phone, go back to sleep, and wake up to the exact same melting ice cube tomorrow morning. Or you can finally step off the hamster wheel, build the machine, and force your money to start doing the heavy lifting for you. So, I want you to drop down into the comments right now and make a public commitment to yourself. What is the exact dollar amount of your new 6-month cash ceiling? And what specific day of the month are you setting up your automated sweep?